The space around Zelari Prime burned with the fire of dying ships. Commander Kethera pressed her four-fingered hand against the cracked viewing port of her flagship and watched another refugee transport explode in the distance. The bright flash lit up her pale blue face for just a moment before fading back into the cold darkness of space. "Commander, we are losing the orbital defense platforms," reported her weapons officer. His voice shook with fear and exhaustion. They had been fighting for 3 days straight, and everyone knew they were losing badly. Kethera closed her large, dark eyes and took a deep breath. The Vectvan Empire had come to their peaceful star system like a plague of metal and fire. Zelari had no real military. They were farmers, scientists, and artists. They had never hurt anyone. But the Vectans did not care about that. "How many civilian ships escaped?" she asked. "Maybe 1,000 out of 50,000, came the reply. "The Vectans are hunting them down one by one." Another explosion rocked the bridge. Kethera grabbed onto her command chair to keep from falling. Red warning lights flashed everywhere. The ship's computer kept announcing damage reports in a calm voice that seemed wrong for such a terrible moment. "Commander, we have lost main engines," her engineer called out. "Life support is failing on decks 5 through 9. Kethera looked around at her crew. These were good people. They had families waiting for them on the planet below. Families that were probably already dead. The Vectans did not take prisoners. They did not want slaves or tribute. They just wanted everything Zelari to be gone forever. Through the chaos of battle, she could see the massive Vectvan dreadnoughts moving closer to her homeworld. Each one was 3 times larger than her flagship. Their weapons could crack a planet's crust. Soon they would begin the final bombardment, and every living thing on Zelari Prime would burn. "Send out the distress signal," she ordered. "All frequencies, all languages we know." Her communications officer looked at her with confusion. "Commander, there is no one close enough to help us. The nearest friendly system is weeks away." "Send it anyway," Kethera said firmly. "Someone might hear us. Someone might care." The young officer nodded and began working at his station. Kethera knew it was probably useless. The Galactic Council moved too slowly to help anyone. Most other species were too afraid of the Vectvan Empire to get involved. But she had to try. She had to believe that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, someone would hear their cry for help not far away from the dying Zelari system. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee aboard the exploration ship U.E.S. Liberty. The ship was small compared to military vessels, with a crew of only 42 humans. They were on the edge of known space, mapping new star systems and looking for signs of life. Jake was reading reports from the night shift when the communications console started beeping loudly. The sound was urgent and strange. "Lieutenant Lisa." Grant, his tactical officer, looked up from her station with surprise. "Captain, we are getting a distress signal," she called out. "It's coming from really far away. The signal is weak, but it's definitely a call for help." Jake set down his coffee and walked over to the communications station where Specialist Tony Rodriguez was working frantically at the controls. Tony was the best communications expert in the fleet. If anyone could figure out what they were hearing, it was him. "What do we have, Tony?" Jake asked. "It's in a language I've never heard before, sir," Tony replied. "But there are images attached to the signal. You need to see this." Tony put the images up on the main screen. Jake felt his blood turn cold. The pictures showed ships being destroyed, cities burning, and crowds of alien civilians running in terror. The beings in the pictures looked nothing like humans. They were tall and thin with blue skin and large eyes, but their fear was something any human could understand. "My God," Lisa whispered. "It's a massacre." More images flashed on the screen. Children crying over dead parents. Ships full of refugees being blown apart by massive warships. Entire planets being bombarded from orbit until nothing was left but burning rock. Can you figure out where this coming from? Jake asked Tony. Working on it, sir, Tony said, his fingers flying over the controls. The signal is bouncing off several relay stations, but I think I can trace it back to its source. Jake watched the horrible images and felt something burning in his chest. Humans had seen things like this before in their own history. They knew what genocide looked like. They knew what it meant when innocent people cried out for help and no. One came. Sir, I've got the location, Tony announced. It's the Zelari system, about 12 light years from here. But sir, according to these readings, the battle is happening right now. Jake looked at his crew. He could see the same fire in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. Humans had made many mistakes in their past, but they had learned important lessons from them. They had learned that good people must stand up to evil, even when the odds were terrible. Lisa, how fast can we get to Earth? He asked. 3 days at maximum speed, she replied. But sir, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Jake nodded slowly. These people need help, real help, the kind that only Earth can provide. He turned to address his entire crew over the ship's communication system. This is the captain speaking. We have just received a distress signal from an alien species under attack. They are being wiped out by an enemy that shows no mercy. We are going to Earth to report this to Fleet Command. I know this might mean war with an unknown enemy, but if we don't act, these innocent people will all die. Anyone who wants to transfer off this ship when we reach Earth is free to do so. No shame in that, but I will not ignore this call for help. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then Lisa spoke up. Sir, speaking for the crew, we're with you, all the way. Jake nodded and felt pride swell in his chest. This was why humanity had spread to the stars. Not to conquer or to take, but to protect those who could not protect themselves. Tony, send a message ahead to Earth. Tell them we have a priority alert for Fleet Command. Tell them the Deathworlders are needed. As the UE's Liberty turned toward Earth at maximum speed, the distress signal from the Zelari continued to echo through space, carrying with it the hopes of a dying species and the promise of an unstoppable response. The war room deep beneath Geneva was silent, except for the quiet hum of computers and the soft breathing of the most powerful military leaders on Earth. Admiral Patricia Hayes sat at the head of the long metal table, her weathered hands folded. As she watched the terrible images from the Zelari system play across the large screen, the footage was even worse when viewed in high definition. Burning cities covered entire continents. Refugee ships tried to escape into space only to be hunted down like animals. Families were torn apart as they ran for their lives. The Vectan warships moved through the system like death itself, destroying everything in their path. General Marcus Cole, the head of Earth's ground forces, leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. How many people are we talking about here? He asked. Best estimates put the Zelari population at around 8 billion before the attack, replied Dr. Elena Vasquez, the chief xenobiologist. Current estimates suggest maybe 2 billion are still alive, scattered across different worlds in their system. And dropping fast, added Captain Morrison, who had arrived on Earth just 6 hours ago. His uniform was still wrinkled from the long journey, but his eyes were sharp with determination. Admiral, every minute we wait, more of them die. Admiral Hayes nodded and turned to Dr. Vasquez. Tell us what we know about both species. I want to understand who we're dealing with here. Dr. Vasquez stood up and activated a holographic display showing detailed images of both alien races. The Zelari are what we would call a peaceful species. They evolved from herbivores on a world with very little natural conflict. They have advanced technology, especially in medicine and agriculture, but they have no military tradition. They've never fought a real war. She changed the display to show the Vecthan attackers. The aliens looked like giant insects crossed with reptiles. They had hard shells, multiple arms, and faces that seemed designed for killing. The Vecthans are the opposite. They're apex predators from a low-gravity world. They've built their entire civilization around conquest and warfare. They move from system to system, taking what they want and destroying everything else. What do they want from the Zellari? Asked Colonel Betty Stone, the commander of Earth's. Space Marines? Nothing, Dr. Vasquez replied. That's what makes this so horrible. They don't want slaves or resources. They just want the Zellari to be dead. Some species call it the Great Cleansing. The Vecthans believe the galaxy would be better with fewer weak species in it. The room fell quiet again. Every human in the room understood what that meant. They had seen this kind of evil before in their own history. They knew what happened when good people did nothing to stop monsters. How big is their fleet? Admiral Hayes asked. Commander Lisa Grant, who had come to Earth with Captain Morrison, consulted her tablet. Intelligence suggests they have over 300 warships in the Zellari system. Each one is larger and more heavily armed than anything in our current fleet. So we're outnumbered 3-1, said General Cole. More like 5-1, Lisa corrected. We can mobilize maybe 60 ships on short notice. Several of the officers around the table looked worried. These were not good odds, even for humans. But Admiral Hayes had been in the military for 30 years. She had seen humans do impossible things when the cause was right. Dr. Vasquez, what else can you tell us about Vecthan military tactics? She asked. They rely on superior numbers and overwhelming firepower, the scientist replied. They're used to fighting species that surrender quickly when faced with hopeless odds. They've never encountered serious resistance. What about their ships? Any weaknesses? They're built for low-gravity environments, Dr. Vasquez said. Their ships are large, but not very maneuverable. They're designed to operate in open space, not in complex environments like asteroid fields or gas giant atmospheres. Admiral Hayes smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Interesting. What about their ground forces? Powerful, but slow to adapt. They're used to fighting enemies that break and run. They've never faced soldiers who keep fighting when wounded or cornered. General Cole leaned forward. You're saying they've never fought humans before? They've never fought anyone like humans. Before, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Most species in the galaxy evolved on safer worlds than Earth. They don't have our survival instincts or our ability to function under extreme stress. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as the implications sank in. Admiral Hayes stood up and walked to the large display showing the Zellari system. The red dots representing Vecthan ships seemed to cover everything like a disease. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, I want you to understand something. The Vecthan Empire has never heard of humans. They don't know what we're capable of. They think they're dealing with just another weak species that will run away when threatened. She turned to face the room. They're about to learn why Earth is called the Deathworld. They're about to discover what happens when you threaten innocent people in front of humans. Captain Morrison stood up. Admiral, I request permission to return to the Zellari system immediately. My crew and I can provide reconnaissance and support the survivors until the main fleet arrives. Denied, Admiral Hayes said firmly. You've done enough, Captain. You brought us this information, and now you need to let us handle it. With respect, Admiral, those people are dying right now. Every hour we wait gives us more time to prepare. Admiral Hayes interrupted. This isn't going to be some quick rescue mission, Captain. This is going to be war. Real war. And when humans go to war, we do it right. She activated the room's communication system. This is Admiral Hayes. I am authorizing Operation Thunderstrike. All fleet commanders report to battle stations. All shore leave is canceled. All reserve units are activated immediately. The room, filled with the sound of chairs scraping as officers stood up to leave. Admiral Hayes called out over the noise. People, the galaxy is about to learn something new about humanity. They're going to learn that we don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for anyone who can't fight for themselves. The Vectans picked the wrong species to mess with. General Cole paused at the door. Admiral, what if we lose? What if they're just too strong? Admiral Hayes looked at the images of dying Zalari civilians still playing on the screen. Then we make sure they remember why they should never threaten. Innocent people again. Win or lose, Marcus, they're going to know they've been in a fight with humans. As the officers filed out to prepare for the largest military operation in human history, Admiral Hayes remained behind with Dr. Vasquez. Scientist was still studying the Vectan ships on the display. Elena, do you really think we can win this? The Admiral asked quietly. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. Patricia, I've studied dozens of alien species. I've never seen one that fights the way humans do. The Vectans are about to face something they've never encountered before. They're about to face a species that gets more dangerous when you corner them. High above them, the first ships of the human fleet were already beginning to move toward the edge of the solar system. The Deathworld Armada was mobilizing, and somewhere in the Zalari system, the Vectan Empire was about to receive a very unpleasant surprise. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched 12 human vessels move through the asteroid field like deadly shadows. 3 days had passed since they arrived at the edge of Zalari space, and what they found was worse than die. Anyone had imagined. The Vethan fleet had spread out across the system like a cancer. Their massive ships hunted down the last refugee convoys with cold efficiency. Morrison had watched through his ship's telescopes as entire families were blown apart just for trying to escape. The sight made his stomach turn and his hands clench into fists. Captain, we have movement from the Vectan patrol group near the gas giant, reported Lieutenant Commander Sam Brooks from the tactical station. Sam was tall and built like a mountain, with scars on his hands from years of military service. 3 heavy cruisers are moving to intercept another refugee ship. Morrison looked at the display showing the tactical situation. The refugee ship was small and damaged, barely limping along on failing engines. The 3 Vectan cruisers were massive by comparison, each one capable of destroying the refugee ship with a single shot. Distance to intercept? Morrison asked. We can be there in 15 minutes if we push the engines hard, replied his pilot. Lieutenant Amy Chun. Amy was small and quick, with steady hands and nerves of steel. She could fly a ship through spaces that would terrify pilots from other worlds. Do it, Morrison ordered. All ships, prepare for attack run. We go in fast, hit hard, and get out before they know what happened. The human task force moved through the asteroid field like hunters stalking prey. Their ships were smaller than the Vectan vessels, but they were faster and much more maneuverable. The humans had learned to use the environment to their advantage, hiding behind asteroids and using the gravitational pull of planets to slingshot themselves into attack positions. War Marshal Vexvar stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched his cruisers close in on another fleeing transport. The Zalari were proving to be disappointingly easy to hunt. They ran in straight lines, broadcast distress signals that gave away their positions, and never fought back with any. Real skill. Marshal, the transport is trying to hide behind the gas giant's largest moon, reported his weapons officer. The Vectan was a giant insect-like creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that could track multiple targets at once. Let them hide, Exfer replied with amusement. It will only delay the inevitable. Order the cruisers to surround the moon. We will flush them out like the vermin they are. Dexfer had been fighting weak species for 20 years. The pattern was always the same. First came the desperate resistance, then the pleas for mercy, then the final collapse into helpless panic. The Zelari were following the script perfectly. Marshal, we are detecting some unusual energy readings near the asteroid belt, reported. The sensor officer. Probably debris from destroyed ships, Exver said without interest. Focus on the transport. I want this system cleared of Zelari filth by tomorrow. But the energy readings were not debris. They were 12 human ships moving through the asteroids at high speed, their weapons powered and their crews ready for battle. Morrison's task force had used the gas giant's magnetic field to mask their approach, a trick that required precise navigation and nerves of steel. All ships, attack formation, Morrison ordered over the communication channel. Remember, we hit the engines first, then the weapon systems. Don't give them time to call for help. The human ships burst out of the asteroid field like avenging angels. Their weapons lit up the darkness of space as they focused their fire on the lead Victhan cruiser. The alien ship's shields flared and sparked under the concentrated assault. The Victhan flagship, alarms began screaming. The sensor officer stared at his instruments in confusion. Marshal, we are under attack. Multiple contacts, small ships, moving at high speed. Dexfer spun around, his compound eyes reflecting the flashing warning lights. What? From where? I thought we had destroyed all Zelari military vessels. These are not Zelari ships, Marshal. The energy signatures are completely different. Unknown. Species, unknown technology. The lead Victhan cruiser tried to turn to face the attacking human ships, but it was too late. The human weapons cut through its engines, like knives through paper. The massive alien vessel began to drift helplessly, its power systems failing. This is impossible, Exfer hissed. No species fights like this. They came out of nowhere. Lieutenant Commander Sam Brooks led the boarding party that attacked the second Victhan cruiser. His team of 12 Marines moved through the alien. Ship's corridors in perfect coordination, their weapons ready and their movements smooth despite the zero-gravity environment that the Victhans inside the ship were used to fighting in normal gravity. They moved clumsily in the weightless conditions, firing their weapons wildly and hitting nothing but the walls. The human Marines, trained for combat in any environment, picked them off one by one. These aliens are bigger and stronger than us, Sam reported to Morrison over the radio, but they can't handle zero-G combat. It's like they've never fought in space before. Keep moving, Morrison replied. Secure their engine room, and then get out. We don't want to stay here too long. The third Victhan cruiser tried to escape, but Amy Chun was ready for it. She pushed her ship's engines beyond their normal limits, using the gravitational pull of nearby asteroids to gain speed. Her ship screamed through space like a bullet, closing the distance in seconds. Weapons locked on target, reported the gunner. Firing now. The human weapons struck the fleeing cruiser's engine section with surgical precision. The alien ship's faster-than-light drive exploded in a brilliant flash, leaving the vessel stranded in normal spacedot in less than 20 minutes. The human task force had destroyed or disabled 3 Victhan cruisers without taking a single casualty. The refugee transport they had come to save was already limping toward safety, its alien crew broadcasting grateful thanks in their strange language. All ships return to the asteroid field, Morrison ordered. We'll wait there for the next opportunity. As the human ships disappeared back into the maze of floating rocks, Communications Officer Tony Rodriguez picked up a new signal. Captain, I'm getting something from the surviving Zelari forces. It's Commander Cathara, the one who sent the original distress signal. The image that appeared on the main screen showed a tall, thin alien with blue skin and large, dark eyes. Her face was worn with exhaustion and grief, but there was new hope in her expression. "Unknown ships," she said in heavily accented but understandable English. "I am Commander Cathara of the Zelari Defense Force. We have been monitoring your battle against the Vectan forces. Are you the ones they call the Deathworlders?" Morrison smiled grimly. "We're humans, Commander, and we got your message." Cathara's eyes widened with amazement. "The legends are true. You actually came." "We came," Morrison confirmed, "and we brought friends, lots of friends." Across the Zelari system, the surviving Vectan commanders were reporting the strange attacks to their leadership. Ships that moved, like ghosts through asteroid fields. Warriors who fought effectively in conditions that would paralyze normal soldiers. An enemy that struck without warning and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. War Marshal Dexvor stared at the Jing tactical display showing the locations of the attacks. 3 separate Vectan patrol groups had been hit by the mysterious ships in the last 6 hours. Each attack had been perfectly planned and executed with military precision that seemed impossible. What manner of species are we facing? He wondered. Aloud, his science officer, a younger Vectan with newer technology implanted in his shell, looked up from his analysis station. "Marshal, based on the attack patterns and ship configurations, I believe we are dealing with a species that has evolved in a high-gravity, high-danger environment. Their ships are built for maneuverability rather than size. Their crews seem to be comfortable fighting in conditions that would be fatal to most life forms." Dexver felt something he had not experienced in many years. Fear, not fear of death, which was always present in combat, but fear of the unknown. Fear of facing an enemy that fought by rules he did not understand. "Send a message to Emperor Vexter," he ordered. "Tell him we may need reinforcements." High above the system, more human ships were already on their way. The advance guard had made first contact with the enemy, and the results were promising. The Vectan Empire was about to learn that there were some species in the galaxy that did not run when threatened. Some species fought back. Emperor Vexter stood in his private chamber aboard the massive Imperial flagship, staring at the holographic display that showed the entire Vectan Empire. Red dots marked their conquered territories, stretching across dozens of star systems like drops of blood on a dark canvas. For 30 years, those red dots had only grown larger and more numerous. But now, for the first time in his reign, they had stopped growing. The door to his chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and War Marshal Dexvor entered. The veteran commander looked tired and worried, his insect-like features tense with barely controlled fear. "Your Imperial Majesty," Dexvor said, bowing low, "I have come to report on the situation in the Zelari system." "Rise," Vexter commanded. "Tell me about these mysterious attackers." Dexvor straightened, but kept his eyes down. "They call themselves humans, Your Majesty. They appear to be a previously unknown species from somewhere beyond our mapped territories. Their ships are small, but incredibly fast and maneuverable. Their crews seem to be immune to conditions that would kill normal soldiers." "How many ships do they have?" the Emperor asked. "Perhaps a dozen in the system, Your Majesty. But they fight like nothing we have ever encountered. They use asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres as cover. They coordinate attacks across multiple targets simultaneously. They board our ships and fight effectively in zero gravity." Emperor Vexter's compound eyes glittered with interest. "Interesting. And you believe they pose a real threat to our forces?" "Your Majesty, in the past week they have destroyed or disabled over 20 of our ships. They have rescued dozens of Zelari refugee convoys. They are turning what should have been a simple extermination into a real war." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. He had built his empire by understanding his enemies and exploiting their weaknesses. Every species they had conquered had been weak in some way. The Zelari were pacifists. The Karathi were cowards. The Nexari were too proud to work together. But these humans seemed different. "How many reinforcements do you need?" he asked finally. "Your Majesty, I believe we need to commit the full Imperial fleet to this system. These humans are not like other species. They seem to get stronger when they are outnumbered." Vexther turned to look out the viewport at the stars beyond. "Very well. Prepare the fleet for immediate departure. I will command this operation personally." "Your Majesty, surely that is not necessary." "It is necessary," the Emperor interrupted. "These humans have humiliated our forces and interfered with our rightful conquest. They need to be taught their place in the galactic order. They need to understand what happens when someone challenges the Vectan Empire." Meanwhile, in the Sol system, the largest military mobilization in human history was reaching its final stages. Fleet Admiral Douglas Carter stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought UES Vengeance and watched hundreds of ships moving into formation around him. Each vessel represented the best of human engineering and the finest crews Earth could produce. "Admiral, final ship counts," reported his aide, Commander Kate Wilson. "We have 63 major combat vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts, 24 cruisers, and 27 destroyers. Supporting vessels include 42 troop transports, 18 supply ships, and 36 fighter carriers." Admiral Carter nodded slowly. It was an impressive force, but he knew they would be facing an enemy with superior numbers and firepower. The key would be using humanity's advantages to level the playing field. "What about our ground forces?" he asked. "Marine Colonel Rita Stone reports her forces are ready for deployment," Kate replied. "We have 30,000 Marines aboard the transports, plus full equipment for planetary assault operations." "And our fighter squadrons?" "Wing Commander Pete Jackson has organized 12 fighter wings, each with 36 ships. All pilots are volunteers with combat experience." Admiral Carter smiled grimly. The human military had been preparing for this kind of war for decades without knowing it. Every training exercise, every simulation, every piece of equipment had been designed to give humans an edge against superior numbers. "Send a message to Captain Morrison," he ordered. "Tell him the cavalry is coming." In the Zelari system, Jake. Morrison received the message with a mix of relief and anticipation. His advance guard had been fighting hit-and-run battles for over a week, but they were starting to take casualties. The Vectans were learning to adapt to human tactics, and they were bringing in more ships every day. "Captain, we have new contacts." "On long-range sensors," reported Amy Chun from the pilot station. "It looks like a massive fleet moving toward the system. Definitely Vectan design." Morrison studied the tactical display. The approaching fleet was enormous, easily 3 times larger than anything they had faced so far. "How long until they arrive?" 6 hours, maybe less." "And our reinforcements?" "Admiral Carter's fleet is still 12 hours out." Morrison felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came before a difficult battle. They would have to hold the line against impossible odds until help arrived. It was exactly the kind of situation that humans were famous for throughout the galaxy. "All ships, prepare for defensive positions," he ordered. "We need to buy time for the fleet to get here." Commander Cathara received the news aboard her damaged flagship with a mixture of hope and terror. The human advance guard had saved thousands of Zelari lives over the past week, but now they were about to face the full might of the Vectan Empire. "Commander, the human captain is requesting permission to coordinate our remaining forces with his ships," reported her communications officer. "Granted," Cathara replied immediately. "Tell him we will follow his orders." She had watched the humans fight for days now, and she was amazed by their tactical skill and fearless determination. They moved through space like they were born to. Fighting in conditions that would paralyze most species. But even humans had limits, and the approaching Vectan fleet was beyond anything they had faced. "Commander, the human captain is on the communication channel," her officer announced. Morrison's face appeared on the main screen, calm and confident despite the approaching danger. "Commander Cathara, we need to talk about evacuation plans for your remaining civilians." "Captain Morrison, my people will not abandon their homeworld," Cathara replied firmly. "We will fight beside you to the end," Morrison smiled. "I was hoping you would say that. But I need you to understand something. The next few hours are going to be the hardest fight any of us have ever faced. The Vectans are bringing everything they have." "We understand," Cathara said. "We have seen what your people can do. If humans are willing to fight for us, then we will fight for ourselves." "Good," Morrison replied, "because they're about to learn what happens when you threaten someone under human protection." High above the system, Emperor Vexter's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Over 400 ships arranged themselves in attack positions, their weapons powered and ready for battle. The Emperor himself stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical displays with satisfaction. "Your Majesty, we are detecting the human ships hiding in the asteroid field," reported his sensor officer. 12 vessels, just as War Marshal Vexfer reported. "Only 12?" the Emperor asked with amusement. "They dare to face the full Imperial fleet with only 12 ships?" "It appears so, Your Majesty. They seem to be taking defensive positions around the inhabited planets." Emperor Vexter laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "These humans are either very brave or very stupid. Perhaps both, no matter. We will crush them quickly and then finish exterminating the Zalari." He turned to his fleet commander. "Begin the attack. I want those human ships destroyed within the hour." But as the massive Vectan fleet moved toward the inner system, long-range sensors detected something new. More ships were approaching from the edge of the system. Many more ships. "Your Majesty," the sensor officer called out, his voice suddenly uncertain. "We are detecting additional contacts. Large fleet, unknown configuration, approaching at high speed." Emperor Vexter stared at the tactical display as hundreds of new contact symbols appeared on the screen. The approaching fleet was massive, easily matching his own in size and power. "Who are they?" he demanded. "Unknown, Your Majesty. But based on their energy signatures, they appear to be human vessels." For the first time in 30 years of conquest, Emperor Vexter felt something cold settle in his stomach. These humans had not come to face his fleet with 12 ships. They had come with an armada. The Deathworld fleet had arrived, and the galaxy was about to witness the largest space battle in recorded history. The space around Zalari Prime had become a graveyard of metal and fire. Admiral Douglas Carter stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance and watched the largest battle in human history unfold before him. Hundreds of ships from both fleets moved through the darkness like deadly dancers, their weapons lighting up the void with brilliant flashes of destruction. "Admiral, the Vectan flagship is moving to engage our center line," reported his tactical officer. "They're trying to break through our formation." Carter studied the holographic display showing the battle. The Vectan Empire had brought over 400 ships to this fight. The human fleet numbered only 160 vessels. By any normal calculation, this should have been a massacre. But humans had never been normal. "Signal all destroyers," Carter ordered. "Execute maneuver Delta 7. Use the planet's gravity well to slingshot around their flank." The human destroyers broke away from the main formation and dove towards Zalari Prime at dangerous speeds. They used the planet's gravity to whip around its surface like stones from a slingshot, coming up behind the Vectan fleet at angles that should have been impossible. Emperor Vexter watched from his flagship as the human ships performed maneuvers that defied everything he knew about space combat. How are they doing that? He demanded. No species can navigate that close to a planetary gravity well. Your Majesty, our science officers believe these humans evolved on a high-gravity world, replied his fleet commander. They seem to be naturally adapted to extreme gravitational forces. The Emperor's compound eyes tracked the human ships as they emerged from behind the planet and struck his rear formations with devastating precision. 3 Vectan heavy cruisers exploded under the concentrated fire before they could even turn to face their attackers. Impossible, Vexter hissed. Order the 4th battle group to intercept those destroyers. But the human destroyers were already gone, disappearing into the asteroid field that surrounded the system's outer edge. The Vectan ships that pursued them found themselves flying into a maze of floating rocks and debris, where the smaller human vessels could hide and strike without warning. Captain Ryan Foster commanded one of those destroyers, the U.E.'s Lightning. His ship was barely 1/10 the size of a Vectan battlecruiser, but it moved through the asteroid field like a fish through water. His crew had trained for years in environments that would crush ships from gentler worlds. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported his weapons officer. Vectan heavy cruiser moving toward our position. He can't see us behind this asteroid, Foster replied calmly. Wait until he passes the debris field, then hit his engines. The Lightning waited in the shadow of a massive rock while the alien cruiser moved past like a blind giant. When the moment was perfect, Foster's ship emerged and struck with surgical precision. The Vectan vessel's engines exploded in a chain reaction that left it drifting helplessly. Target neutralized, the weapons officer reported. Moving to next position. This pattern repeated itself across the battlefield. Human ships used tactics that seemed impossible to alien minds. They fought in 3 dimensions while their enemies thought in 2. They used environmental hazards as weapons. They coordinated attacks across vast distances with timing that seemed supernatural. In the atmosphere of Zalari Prime, an even more desperate battle was taking place. Marine Colonel Rita Stone led her forces in the evacuation of the planet's last major city while fighting off Vectan ground troops at the same time. Colonel, we have Vectan dropships coming in from the east, reported Sergeant Dan Miller over the radio. At least 50 of them. Rita crouched behind the rubble of a destroyed building and checked her rifle. Around her, human Marines were helping Zalari civilians reach the evacuation ships. The aliens were tall and fragile compared to humans, but they moved quickly when their lives depended on it. All squads, defensive positions, she ordered. Protect the evacuation zones at all costs. The Vectan soldiers that emerged from the S dropships were massive creatures with thick armor and powerful weapons. They had expected to face terrified civilians and maybe a few scattered defenders. Instead, they found themselves fighting humans who seemed to thrive in the chaos of urban combat. Private Jennifer Adams crouched in a bombed-out apartment building and watched the alien soldiers advance down the street below. Her squad had been fighting for 6 hours straight, but none of them showed any signs of slowing down. Humans were built for endurance warfare. Jenny, take the shot, her squad leader whispered through the radio. Jennifer's rifle spoke once, and the lead Vectan soldier collapsed. The others scattered for cover, but they were too slow. Human soldiers emerged from hiding places throughout the city and opened fire with disciplined precision. The aliens had superior weapons and armor, but they moved clumsily in the urban environment. They were used to fighting on open battlefields where their size and strength gave them advantages. In the narrow streets and collapsed buildings of this city, those advantages became weaknesses. This is impossible, transmitted one Vectan officer. These humans fight like demons. They are everywhere at once. Back in space, the main battle was reaching its climax. Admiral Carter had drawn the bulk of the Vectan fleet into a massive engagement near the system's gas giant. The human ships were outnumbered 3-1, but they were winning through superior tactics and sheer determination. Wing Commander Pete Jackson led his fighter squadrons through the chaos of the main battle. His small ships darted between the massive capital vessels like angry insects, striking at vulnerable points and drawing enemy fire away from larger human ships. "Red Leader, this is Blue 6, came a voice over the radio. "I have a clean shot at the Vectan flagship's bridge." "Negative, Blue 6, Pete replied. "Stay with the formation. We stick to the plan." The plan was working perfectly. While the fighters kept the enemy distracted, the human capital ships used their superior maneuverability to outfight vessels twice their size. The Vectan ships were powerful but slow to react. They had been designed to overwhelm weaker enemies with brute force, not to fight a mobile opponent that refused to stand still. Emperor Vexter felt his confidence crumbling as he watched ship after ship in his fleet go dark on the tactical display. The humans were not just fighting his forces. They were winning. "Your Majesty, we have lost over 100 ships, reported his fleet commander. "The humans have lost perhaps 20. "How is this possible?" the Emperor demanded. "We outnumber them. Our ships are larger and more powerful. Your Majesty, I believe we are fighting a species that has evolved specifically for warfare. Every aspect of their technology and tactics seems designed for combat effectiveness rather than intimidation." On the surface of Zelari Prime, Colonel Stone received word that the last civilian evacuation ship had safely reached orbit. Her Marines had held the line long enough to save over 2 million Zelari civilians, fighting off ground forces that should have overwhelmed them. "All units, begin withdrawal to the extraction point," she ordered. Mission accomplished. As her exhausted but victorious Marines pulled back from their positions, Sergeant Miller shook his head in amazement. "Colonel, how did we just fight? Off an entire Vectan army division?" Rita smiled grimly as she watched the alien soldiers cautiously emerging from cover to find empty streets. "Because, Dan, we're humans. And humans don't know how to quit." In space, Admiral Carter was preparing for the final phase of the battle. The Vectan fleet was broken and scattered, but Emperor Vexter's flagship was still intact and dangerous. "Admiral, the enemy flagship is trying to escape to the outer system," reported his tactical officer. "Negative," Carter replied firmly. "Today we send a message to the entire galaxy. When you threaten innocent people, humans will find you. And when humans find you, there is nowhere to run." The UE's Vengeance and its escort ships pursued the fleeing Vectan flagship through the debris field that had once been the pride of an empire. The Emperor's vessel was larger and more heavily armed, but it could not match the speed and agility of the human ships. "This is Admiral Carter of the Terran fleet," came the transmission to the Vectan flagship. "Surrender now, and your crew will be treated according to the laws of war." Emperor Vexter stared at the approaching human ships and felt something he had never experienced before. Complete and total defeat. His empire was broken, his fleet was destroyed, and he was about to be captured by a species he had never heard of 3 weeks ago. "Never," he transmitted back. "The Vectan Empire does not surrender to inferior species." "Then you have chosen," Admiral Carter replied sadly. The human ships opened fire with surgical precision. They did not try to destroy the enemy flagship, but instead systematically disabled its weapons, engines, and life support systems. Within minutes, the pride of the Vectan Empire was a drifting hulk. As rescue ships moved in to collect the surviving Vectan crew members, Admiral Carter broadcast a message to every ship in the system, both human and alien. "This is Admiral Douglas Carter of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Vectan invasion of the Zelari system has been defeated. Any alien vessel that wishes to leave this system peacefully may do so. Any vessel that chooses to continue attacking civilians will be destroyed. 6 months after the Battle of Zalari Prime, the galaxy had become a very different place. News of humanity's victory over the Vectan Empire had spread to every corner of known space, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who could barely believe what they had witnessed. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the newly constructed headquarters of the Terran Protection Pact on Zalari Prime and looked out at the bustling construction sites below. The planet was being rebuilt, but it was no longer just a Zalari world. It had become something new, a symbol of what could happen when good people refused to stand by while evil threatened the innocent. "Admiral, the morning briefing is ready," announced her aide, Commander Kate Wilson. "We have requests for assistance from 12 different star systems." Hayes nodded and walked to the conference room, where representatives from dozens of alien species waited. The room was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate beings of all shapes and sizes. Water-breathing Aquarians sat in specialized tanks, while the crystalline Salithi communicated through harmonic vibrations that were translated by advanced computers. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," Hayes began, "let's review the current situation across our protected territories." Commander Cathara, now wearing the uniform of the rebuilt Zalari Defense Force, stood to give the first report. The months since the human arrival had transformed her from a desperate refugee into a confident military leader. Working alongside human advisors had taught her people that strength came not from weapons alone, but from the will to use them in defense of others. "The Zalari system is now fully operational," she reported. "Our defense fleet consists of 24 vessels built with human technology and crewed by joint Zalari human teams. We have also established 3 orbital defense platforms around our homeworld." Hayes smiled with approval. The Zalari had learned quickly that the best way to ensure peace was to be prepared for war. Their new ships were smaller than the old Vectan vessels, but they were fast, maneuverable, and crewed by people who had seen what happened when evil went unchallenged. "What about refugee resettlement?" Hayes asked. "Over 3 million Zalari civilians have been relocated to safe worlds within the Protection Pact," Cathara replied. "Our people are no longer concentrated in a single system, which makes us much harder to exterminate." The next speaker was Ambassador Zenthar of the Korathi Republic. His people had been the first to request human protection after hearing about the Battle of Zalari Prime. The Korathi were a peaceful trading species who had lived in fear of various aggressive empires for generations. "Admiral Hayes, I am pleased to report that pirate attacks on Korathi trade routes have dropped by 90% since your patrol ships began operating in our territory," Zenthar said. "For the first time in 50 years, our merchants can travel without fear." "Any sign of organized resistance to our presence?" Hayes asked. "Some grumbling from the old pirate clans, but nothing serious. Most have decided that easier prey exists elsewhere in the galaxy." The reports continued around the table. The Nexari had requested help rebuilding their military after decades of civil war. The Peaceful Botanical Collective had asked for protection from slavers who harvested their people for exotic gardens. Even some former Vectan colonies had declared independence and requested admission to the Protection Pact. "What about the Vectan remnants?" Hayes asked when the regional reports were finished. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral and Commander of the Rapid Response Fleet, stood to answer. "The former Emperor Vexter is still in custody on Earth, awaiting trial for war crimes. Most of the surviving Vectan military leaders have gone into exile beyond our patrol range. Intelligence suggests they're trying to rebuild their forces, but it will take years." "Are they still a threat?" "Not immediately," Morrison replied, "but we're keeping an eye on them. A few Vectan commanders have actually requested to join our forces. They claim they were only following orders and want to make amends." Hayes considered this carefully. The human philosophy was to offer redemption. to those who genuinely sought it, but trust had to be earned through actions, not words. What's your recommendation? Cautious acceptance, Morrison said. We put them through extensive psychological evaluation and assign them to non-combat roles. Initially, if they prove themselves over time, we can consider expanding their duties. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, covering everything from trade agreements to joint military exercises. When it finally ended, Hayes walked out onto the observation deck with Kethera and Morrison. The view was spectacular. Zalari Prime stretched out below them, its blue oceans and green continents healing from the scars of war. In orbit, ships from a dozen different species moved in peaceful formations, their crews working together to patrol and protect the growing alliance. Sometimes I can barely believe this is real, Kethara said quietly. 6 months ago, my people, we're facing extinction. Now we're part of something that spans half the galaxy. It's what happens when good people work together, Morrison replied. Humans didn't do this alone. We just showed everyone else that it was possible. Hayes watched. A formation of mixed human and Zalari fighters conduct training exercises near the space station. The pilots communicated in a mixture of languages, but their movements were perfectly coordinated. Different species, different backgrounds, but united by a common purpose. Admiral, incoming priority transmission from Earth, announced Kate Wilson. Over the communication system, Hayes returned to the command center and activated the holographic display. President Maria Santos appeared, her face showing the stress of leading humanity through its rapid expansion into galactic politics. Patricia, I have news that will interest you, Santos said. We've received a formal communication from the Galactic Council. They want to meet with human representatives to discuss our unauthorized military activities in their territory. Hayes laughed. The Galactic Council was a collection of old, established species who had spent centuries talking about problems, instead of solving them. They had done nothing to help the Zalari or any other species facing genocide. But now they were concerned about humans taking action. What did you tell them? Hayes asked. I told them we would be happy to meet with them. Santos replied with a smile. I also told them that any species currently under human protection would remain under human protection, regardless of what the Council decided. I imagine they didn't like that. They didn't. But they also can't do anything about it. Half fair. Member species are already requesting human patrol ships in their territories. The transmission ended, and Hayes turned to address the mixed group of human and alien officers in the command center. People, it looks like we're about to get some official recognition from the old powers in the galaxy, she announced. They're not happy about it, but they're finally starting to understand that the universe has changed. Commander Kethera stepped forward. Admiral, speaking for all the species in the Protection Pact, we want you to know that we stand with humanity, regardless of what the Council says. You answered our call for help when no one else would. That is not something we will ever forget. Similar declarations came from representatives of other species throughout the command center. The Korathi, the Nexari, the Aquarians, and dozens. Of others, all voiced their support for the human-led alliance. Hayes felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. This was what humanity had always been meant for. Not conquest or domination, but protection and partnership. They had found their place in the galaxy by refusing to let others suffer alone. Thank you all, she said. But remember, this alliance isn't about humanity leading anyone. It's about all of us working together to protect those who can't protect themselves. Later that evening, Hayes stood alone on the observation deck and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, Emperor Vexter sat in a prison cell on Earth, probably, still wondering how his mighty empire had been destroyed by a species he had never heard of. Somewhere else, other aggressive powers were deciding whether to test the resolve of the Protection Pact, But Hayes wasn't worried about future threats. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from the Battle of Zalari Prime. When innocent people cried out for help, humans would answer. And when humans answered a call for help, they brought friends. The Deathworlder Armada was always ready, scattered across 100 star systems, but connected by shared purpose and instant communication. They patrolled the darkness between worlds, watching and waiting for the next cry of distress. Because in a universe full of predators and prey, humanity had chosen to be something different. They had chosen to be guardians, and the galaxy would never be the same.